Hey everyone, today I want to show you the pen, ink and watercolor sketches that I have drawn and painted using the Derwent Inktense watercolor paper. So there are 20 sheets of paper in this paper pad and I managed to create 13 sketches. By the way, I've already reviewed this many months or maybe a year ago, and the paper quality is fantastic. This is 100% cotton watercolor paper. So let's take a look at the sketches one by one. Many of these sketches were actually created for tutorials that were made for my patrons, and you may have seen some of these sketches in the time-lapse tutorials that I have posted on the YouTube channel as well. So this is the first sketch drawn and painted on 20th May 2021. This is a Chinese temple here in Singapore. This is Tian Hock King Temple. I believe the reference I used was from Google Earth, so I had an aerial view of the temple and I drew from, well, the air. I cannot remember the colors that I used. It's probably some scarlet color for the red. I like to use warm reds compared to cool reds because I just like the vibrant orange. I cannot remember what blue I use. It's probably not ultramarine because there is no granulation. So this particular sketch, it has no granulation and no texture. The texture comes from, I would say, the line art, the technique. And I also cannot remember which pen I use. Probably the Pelikan M200 fountain pen because that's the pen that I use most often. So this is a very sketchy sketch. We have some shadows here. This sketch was drawn and painted very quickly, if I remember correctly, because it's just line art, blocks of colors, and the second layer is just shadow layers. We have the greens here, probably mixed with phthalo blue and some other color. The white border was created with this matte surface tape. If you find the tape too sticky, you can always stick it on your clothes a few times before you put it on the paper. So in this video, I'm not going to be able to tell you the exact tools and materials that I use because some of these were painted like so long ago. I like this sketch mostly because I like the vibrant orange. And we have another sketch again, probably drawn with reference from Google Earth because we have a top-down view as well. So this sketch is something, a sketch like this, a scene like this is something that I like to draw, that I enjoy drawing because it's a cityscape. There is a lot of detail. Drawing something like this actually requires a lot of patience and observation skills. Not so much on perspective knowledge because the perspective is everywhere and it's difficult to find out where's the vanishing point. And also because the buildings, you can see all these buildings, they are not parallel to each other. They are not side by side. They are not facing each other directly. So all these buildings, they have different vanishing points. So it's kind of pointless to find out where's the vanishing point. But knowing where the horizon line is will help because all the vanishing points for these buildings, they will go to the horizon line, which is somewhere here. So when you're drawing the diagonal lines, all those diagonal lines should go to a vanishing point on the horizon line. So that will kind of help you draw a bit more accurately. But again, as mentioned many times in my tutorials, you don't need to know perspective in order to draw a scene with perspective. But knowing perspective can help you draw faster and more accurately. Here's a closer look at the details or the lack of details. So for the buildings in the background, I did not draw or paint them with much details. I have some horizontal lines and dots to represent the windows. And here we have some quick strokes to represent the windows. For the windows that are nearer to the front, we have more details. If you can count the windows, you can draw the windows. If you cannot count the windows, you don't have to draw all the windows. So this building seems to have a swimming pool on top. Here in Singapore, we have a lot of greenery mixed with our buildings. This is the sort of scene you will see when Singapore is presented on news overseas. But this scene with a mix of housing and commercial buildings is actually not that common, as in most of the Singapore surface area is just made out of residential estate, just purely residential estate. So this is a mix of residential and commercial, so this sort of mixed area development is not as common compared to residentials. And that makes it more interesting to draw something like this, because the residential blocks or the housing blocks here in Singapore, they are kind of boring. This is, I think, well, these are shop houses. Again, a mix of housing and residential. These shop houses are probably very old, maybe hundreds of years old, and they are conserved in Singapore. So they cannot be torn down because they have conservation status. And for this sketch, I feel like I needed to add more details. It doesn't look like there is a lot of detail. Yeah, that's the only impression that I get, the first impression that I get when I look back at this sketch. And for some of the lines at the top, I used the white gel pen to draw the roof lines. And since this sketch was drawn looking down from the air again, the reference photo is probably Google Earth. This is Little India. Oh, this sketch has no horizon line because, sorry, this scene doesn't have any horizon line because you can see the diagonal lines, they go up. The horizon line is actually out of the photo somewhere far away. So again, to draw something like this, you really need to rely on your patience and observation skills. This was 30th of May. Oh, okay, in that month I drew 3 sketches. This is definitely one of my favorite sketches among all the sketches that you will see in this video. This is Kandahar Street in Singapore. By the way, all the sketches were not drawn on location, unfortunately. Nowadays I seldom go out, so the urban sketching part is not technically urban sketching. This is just drawing from home. And this one was drawn with a reference photo that I have taken. I like this sketch a lot because it has good contrast. It shows off the building very well and the colors are lovely. This blue color is manganese blue, the original manganese blue, if I remember correctly. And the darker blue is probably cobalt blue deep. You can use a limited color palette to paint this sketch, and if you do so, there will be limitations. For example, if you use manganese blue as your only blue, it will be very challenging or impossible to mix dark shadows like this, which is why I'm using 2 blues. And if I just use cobalt blue deep, it would be impossible to get very vibrant blues like this. So cobalt blue deep is one of my favorite colors because the granulation that it creates is so lovely. It is also one of the more expensive colors, a very expensive blue. The pigment code is PB74. So you can see the area here painted with cobalt blue deep. It's a very lovely color. You can create textures for your watercolor sketches instantly, more so compared to ultramarine. I love this sketch because it has a very three-dimensional look to it, and there are many overlapping elements. We have the vehicles overlap the buildings behind, we have this arch overlapping the buildings behind, and we have the building, the shop house overlapping the taller buildings behind, and there is perspective going on. And again, vibrant orange. I love that. Oh, this color, if I remember correctly, is probably yellow ochre or raw sienna. So sometimes I have yellow ochre and raw sienna just for mixing this muted yellows quickly. This is another sketch. If I remember correctly, the color palette is quite similar to this. So this is manganese blue mixed with probably cobalt blue deep again. Yep, definitely. We have cobalt blue deep here and some shadows on the ground. You may notice the blacks in this sketch are not completely black because it's difficult to mix a very dark color, a color that's close to black with cobalt blue deep. So this is the darkest I can get, and we have some white gel pen. So if I want to mix something black, I will probably need Indentrum blue or phthalo blue. But in this case, I'm using a limited color palette, so I just stick with these colors. This is a building in Barcelona. It seems like a government building. I cannot remember the colors that I used. So there is a lot of activity going on. More specifically, a lot of people in front of the building, a lot of vehicles. So the color is a bit more somber. You see all these speckled marks. I believe I use the brush to create all these marks to create the additional texture. And we have all the people in front, and the vehicles and the trees. I like trees because when you have a tree in front of the building, you don't have to draw the details behind. But when you're drawing, make sure to draw or leave space for the trees first, because here you can see I have this line from the building, which was probably drawn first before I drew the tree. So if I drew the tree first or leave space for the tree, I don't have to draw all these vertical lines. And the foreground, background look will look better. The Derwent Inktense watercolor paper handles watercolor really well. Oh, for the leaves here, I drew some of the leaves with inks and some of the leaves were just painted with brush. So sometimes if you know you want to paint a shape with watercolor later on, you may not need to draw it with ink lines first. For example, sometimes I would draw squares for windows on a building, but later paint the squares with watercolor and the lines will be lost. So in that case, I don't actually need to draw those squares first. I can just paint the windows with watercolor, only watercolor. This is Florence. I think this dome is not as circular as the reference photo that I used. Yeah, so the clouds here are a bit different compared to the clouds here. Actually, there are no clouds here. And the clouds here. The clouds here are softer. Here the clouds, you can see they are like patches, patchy. And you can see the different shapes of the clouds. For most of my sketches, I don't utilize the lost edges as much. So usually I have a lot of very solid shapes instead of a lot of colors that blend into other colors. Here's a closer look at this sketch. I believe I created some speckled marks as well. So I have textures on the ink lines. For elements in the foreground, you can draw more details. Actually, you need to draw more details, otherwise they will look kind of unfinished. But for scenes or for subjects that are further away, you don't have to draw that much details because it's difficult to see the details, and things that are further away don't really need that much details. I have some dots for the texture, and I have some dots here as well, and also some additional textures to show off the tiles on the roof. Oh, I have used some color pencils as well. for this area here. If you draw a scene from the top looking down, that scene is going to look more different compared to other sketches that you may see other people draw, mostly because it is usually quite difficult to find an elevated spot to draw from. So most of the urban sketches, we just sit on the ground level and draw looking up. This is the Basilica of Supergirl in Turin, Italy. I believe I drew this building and this scene several times before I managed to get the proportion right. If you want to make it easier for you to get the composition and the proportion and the shapes right, it's not easy to draw the perfect semicircle. Use a pencil. You can always use a pencil first before you start drawing with ink. I like to draw with ink first because I don't have a lot of time, so I usually just draw with ink straight away. But sometimes I do make mistakes, and whatever mistakes that you make at the start of the sketch is going to affect the sketch later on. So for example, if you drew this column too tall, your building will have to be drawn taller relative to the column here. So all those little mistakes that you make at the start of the sketch, they are going to affect all the other things that you are going to draw later. So sometimes it may be good to just use a pencil to mark out the proportion, the composition, to make sure that you can fit all the things you want to draw within the space that you have. This is a vertical sketch. This is Manhattan. This was drawn with a very old photo, and that photo was really beautiful because it has this very strong shape. This is the Times Square building, the old Times Square building before it was plastered with those electronic signboards. So this sketch actually doesn't have a lot of details. For the people on the streets, I just use depths of colors, red, yellow, and blue mostly. There is no green. Yep, so it's just red, yellow, and blue, and black. And these are the white areas at the top of the buses. It's not very clear that these are buses because my drawing is not that accurate. But I like how colorful this area is because this place is so busy. This place is just packed with people. Oh, I guess in this case, I actually used the soft edges technique because here you can see it's difficult to see the boundary of the building and people on the street. And also I merged the end here into the buildings in the background. The depths of paint on the bottom area here were created with Posca markers. And for this sketch, I did not use any scarlet paint. So this is magenta or some cooler red. This is the National Museum of Singapore. I actually drew this 2 times. This is the first sketch drawn with pencil, colored pencil, and watercolor. And this is the second sketch drawn with my usual style, pen, ink, and watercolor, and colored pencils. When it comes to using mixed media, you have to experiment a lot to find the style and the look that you like. In this case, I redrew the sketch because I felt like the pencil marks, the graphite lines, they are not dark enough. The contrast is not strong enough. Here we have colored pencils, and the lines here drawn with graphite. There are pencils with very dark lines. I actually have bought some, but this was drawn with mechanical pencil, if I remember correctly, because I don't want to spend so much time sharpening the pencil, the wooden pencil. So this was drawn with mechanical pencil, and the graphite lead is not that dark. So here's a look on the right side. It's a very sketchy sketch. And this is the redrawn sketch with pen and ink. So the look and feel is kind of different. Yeah, so with the ink lines, you definitely can see stronger contrast, the building stands out more. If you are relying on pencil, you will have to rely on watercolor to create the strong shapes, and in this case the shadow side, the shape is not that strong, the contrast is not that strong. Perhaps I should have made the shadows much darker. Oh, this shadow is nice. Nice as in you can see two colors within the color mix here. So I cannot remember what's the color, but it's a light red with a blue. I also cannot remember what blue it is. Probably manganese blue. So it's always, you can mix very beautiful color mixes when you have when the two colors can still be seen. But this shadow shape here should be darker. It's not that dark. The value is not dark enough. So you see this highlighted area here versus this shadow shape here. The contrast is not that good. So this highlighted area doesn't seem that bright when the shadows are not that dark. When it comes to painting, everything is relative. So if you want to make something brighter, you can make the other thing darker, and you're always comparing. And oh, I like the colored pencil leaves here. By the way, after you have removed the tape and you find that you want to paint or add something to your sketch, be careful not to draw over the boundary. It's not going to look nice. Yeah, I'm saying that based on experience. This is a statue in Italy. I cannot remember the name of this statue. This was drawn in May 2022, so that's 1 year gap from this sketch versus the first sketch you saw earlier. So I don't usually draw in vertical orientation, but sometimes the subject requires you to draw in vertical orientation, such as the case here. Let's take a look at the last sketch, also drawn vertically. This was drawn in July 2022. This, if I'm not wrong, is a street in Turkey, because when I looked at the reference photo, there was a bank behind that seems to be located in Turkey. So this is a street scene in Turkey. It's a one-point perspective scene. The light seems to be coming from there, coming this direction. So all these areas, they are backlit. The black, the darker areas here were mixed with intention blue and some warm red, which I cannot remember. So when I know I need to paint very dark shadows, I will definitely include either intention blue or phthalo blue. And if you use these two blues, they don't have granulations, so you will have to create your granulation or textures some other way. Here's a closer look. Again, you may notice I have very clear lines and clear shapes. I don't use a lot of lost edges. So even for this area here, maybe it could have benefited with the black blending, the darker value blending softly into this highlighted area. Okay, there are a lot of details here, some cast shadows on the ground, perspective lines. Again, you don't need to know perspective in order to draw perspective. If you do know perspective, it's going to help you draw faster and more accurately. So for example, in this case, the vanishing point is here for the building on the right side. So all I have to do to draw those diagonal lines is to point to the vanishing point, the VP, and I can draw those diagonal lines with the correct angle very easily, especially the diagonal lines here, which are very challenging to draw. And the vanishing point for the building on the left side is somewhere here. So this building and this building, they don't share the same vanishing points. All right, let's see what we have here. So while drawing this is actually this. So I drew this area here wrong. So since this was quite early while sketching, I decided to just start on a new piece of paper. Because if I continue drawing, I mean, first of all, this is a very obvious mistake. And if I make an error with the proportion, for example, if I draw the head too big, the body will have to be drawn bigger, and the base of the statue will have to be drawn bigger, and I am probably going to run out of space. So this mistake was made because I wasn't very focused while drawing. I'm just going to reuse this paper to test out color mixes. So I have kind of wasted 7 pieces of paper due to mistakes like this. Let me show you another mistake. See this area here? There are watercolor stain marks here because I actually taped this area, but when I painted with too much water, the water went down and to the back of the paper and soaked the back of the paper. This is the easel that I'm using, which is actually a tablet stand, so it has this catchment area here. So I used too much water. The water went down, collected here, and damaged this piece as well as the last 2 pieces of paper in this paper pad. So what I could have done to prevent this from happening is actually to just push this higher and clip this so that the bottom is not in contact here. But for this sketch, it looks good when I place it on the edge here, so I didn't actually think about that. But usually when I'm painting with the horizontal sketches, I will clip it this way. So that's why I have not experienced this issue before. So all these sketches took me more than a year to complete. So on average, I probably just made 1 sketch a month, at least with this paper. I was drawing and sketching with other sketchbooks and paper as well. It is definitely very satisfying to look at all the sketches that you have created, especially when you're looking at them as a collection like this. By the way, if you want to watch or learn how to draw and paint with pen, ink, and watercolor sketches, you can check out the many free tutorials that I have on my YouTube channel. And if you want even more detailed tutorials, you can support me on Patreon. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it's inspiring. See you guys in the next video. Bye!